Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see everybody coming in, and we want to get started, if we can, just because we are really tight on time. This is a 45-minute rapid-fire but fascinating discussion that we are going to be having on refugees, financial inclusion, and the fight against marginalization. My name's Susan Reichley. I'm the CEO for the International Youth Foundation, and I'm a SID board member. And I have the privilege of welcoming all of you, and most importantly, kicking it right to our moderator, Tim Docking, who is the Managing Director of Refugee Investment Network. He actually established the first impact investing and blended finance collaborative dedicated to creating long-term solutions to forced migration. So we could not have a better moderator to really take us through what is an absolutely critical issue for us today, as we know, with migration levels higher than they have been since World War II, and just obviously the challenges that brings us. Tim brings as well 20 years, more than 20 years of experience in the private and the public sector. He was one of the first leaders at the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which seems like yesterday, I'm sure. So he really has that public-private experience. So I'll kick it over to you, Tim, and thanks so much.
Thanks, Susan, and thanks everyone for choosing to come to our panel today. We're really excited. We've met and gone over our lines, and so we're really excited to share with you and get some feedback from you as well. I want to start off by also thanking conference chairperson and SID board member, ED at ASU's International Development Center, Anna Simmons-Benton, who came up with this panel idea, and I really want to thank her and Catherine as well for raising the profile of this vital topic. It's not very often we get to focus on this issue, which we all think is so important. As Susan said, I'm Tim Docking, Managing Director at the Refugee Investment Network. I'd like to provide just a little bit of context before I introduce the three speakers to my left. I just want to sort of set the stage here. I know that there's been some discussion about displacement and refugees over the course of the day already. I heard some of it at lunchtime, but I just want to lay down a little bit of context. In 2018, the number of forcibly displaced people worldwide reached its highest number in human history. And that was for the 6th consecutive year. Right now, there's over 70 million IDPs and refugees worldwide. So humanitarian organizations, development organizations, you may be one of those, you know that you're stretched thin right now trying to address this issue. Governments are generally handling this issue poorly. So both need new ideas to help address not only the humanitarian concerns, the vital humanitarian concerns, the concerns that have to do with idleness, that have to do with abuse, marginalization of millions of people, but they also need to change the mindset and the narrative surrounding migrants. Currently, as you're aware, migrants are really seen as helpless, as burdens to society, and so the RIN, my organization, really, and the rest of this group here, we discussed changing, how do we sort of talk about migrants in a different voice? Migrants as capable, migrants as an opportunity. And so we tried to articulate this at the RIN in our founding report called Paradigm Shift, which demonstrates that refugees and migrants are investable, they're entrepreneurial, they're credit-worthy, they're gritty employees, they're hardworking. And these are all issues that I'm sure we'll return to today. So now it's really an honor to get to the introductions of the three people sitting next to me. With them, we'll explore some of these themes, and they'll place these themes in the context of their jobs and their work and their organizations and talk about those. We'll do that for about 30 minutes, and then we'll turn to you all for questions. And hopefully we'll have a nice discussion that way. So I'd like to begin to my immediate left. Nicol is a policy officer at State Department's Bureau of Population, Refugee, and Migration, as PRM. There she works on advancing relief and development coherence, strengthening collaboration between the humanitarian and development sectors to improve medium and long-term outcomes for refugees. She also leads PRM's Refugee Livelihoods portfolio, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, as well as PRM's engagement with multilateral development banks. To Anna's left is Vikas Raj. Vikas is Managing Director at Accion Venture Labs and leads Accion's seed stage investment initiative in fintech for the underserved, in addition to managing portfolio relationships and driving strategy and growth at Venture Lab. He currently serves as a board member or observer on numerous global leadership commissions in the fintech and financial services sector, including at AYE Finance, Credit Montre, Confio, First Circle, Self-Lender, SME Corner, Street Shares, and Tienda Pago. To Vikas's left is Sam Rosenfeld, and Sam is a serial entrepreneur and a veteran. His formative years were spent in war zones, seeing firsthand and up close the challenges facing refugees. He now solves problems by building businesses and currently is a chairman at Verdigris Capital Holdings, delivering a charter bank focus on the unbanked and the companies that serve them. So I'd like you to please join me in thanking them for being on the panel today. Why don't we just go right down the line, and Anna, I'll pass the microphone to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Tim. And first, I just want to say just how excited, as someone who works in the humanitarian sphere, to be able to discuss with you all as development actors and private sector actors how we can concretely discuss kind of how we can better bridge the divide between the humanitarian space and the development space, and how really important this is for refugees. I think, and Tim alluded to some of the real challenges I think we're facing today. So first, a couple of quick words about what my bureau does, the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration at PRM. We are the humanitarian bureau at the State Department, and last year in FY 2018, we provided about $3.2 billion in refugee or in humanitarian assistance. We provide protection, we ease suffering, and we support solutions for persecuted and forcibly displaced people around the world. And so this includes refugees, internally displaced populations or IDPs, stateless people, vulnerable migrants, and other populations who have been uprooted from their homes. We primarily do this through providing life-sustaining assistance and protection, largely through our UN Refugee Agency, or UNHCR, as well as the ICRC, or the International Committee of the Red Cross. But we also work significantly with NGO partners and with other international humanitarian organizations. In addition to our overseas assistance, PRM also manages the resettlement of refugees to the United States in cooperation with the Department of Homeland Security and Health and Human Services and other agencies. And finally, we also have a significant policy component that we work on regularly as well. We develop US humanitarian policy and conduct humanitarian diplomacy abroad. So I wanted to set the scene a little bit more, and I know that Tim kind of briefly spoke on this as well, but I think we really find ourselves in a unique situation, and particularly so in the past 10 years. The scale and severity of the crises globally are really unprecedented. In 2017, 44,400 people were displaced every single day, which is unseen. This is a new record. Again, displacement in 2017 increased by about 2.9 million people, and so we're guessing that in 2017, about 68.5 or 70 million people were either IDPs or refugees. And so this is a huge number of people. And UNHCR generally says that this is about the same population or more than the population of the United Kingdom, to kind of give you a sense of just the scale of this crisis right now. And we also expect that we will get new data for 2018 from UNHCR in June, and that these numbers will actually increase significantly given the current crisis in Venezuela. Another issue is that developing countries are increasingly hosting a disproportionate number of refugees, which heightens the challenge that refugees often face in finding economic opportunities while they are displaced. So right now, about 85% of refugees are actually displaced in developing countries. Additionally, these people are not returning home in 3 or 6 months. In general, in 2017, I think the average displacement was for about 10 years, which is incredible. more than 10 million refugees have been in exile for more than 5 years. So these people are often in very protracted situations. And so I think the question really for us is how we can stretch the impact of our relatively limited resources as humanitarian actors, and how can we improve the sustainability of our responses? And I think that the answer is often lying in how we can better create partnerships and innovative thinking with new actors, and that includes development actors and private sector. And I think these figures really have heightened the impetus for us to kind of forge these new relationships. And I think that really promoting self-reliance and social and economic inclusion is going to be a critical part of this puzzle in finding medium to long-term solutions for refugees. By doing so, we can simultaneously reduce the long-term dependence on humanitarian assistance, improve the quality of life of the actual refugees, which is, of course, something that we're hoping to do at the same time, and contribute to local economies at the same time. So I think there's a couple of really good examples of where we're seeing kind of this innovative look and kind of in the nexus between the humanitarian and development spheres that's promoting this economic inclusion that we're hoping to see. We're seeing a lot of interesting work, I think, around cash transfers to refugees right now. So more and more we are providing refugees with cash transfers rather than in-kind assistance to meet their basic needs. And this offers, of course, the dignity and choice for our beneficiaries, but it also does have the potential to increase efficiencies and stimulate local economies at the same time by influxing with cash. It also presents an excellent opportunity to what we call banking refugees, to bring these refugees kind of into the formal financial space, especially if cash is provided through kind of the formal banking system, or if we're building local banking systems to allow this to work, and if there's also financial literacy training kind of provided in tandem with the cash transfers, and so that kind of depends on the context as well. I think another really good example of where we're seeing kind of a lot of this good work is with the World Bank. Through their global concessional financing facility and primarily through refugee hosting countries and the IDA refugee sub-window, they've really been a thought leader on addressing the development challenges of refugee and displacement crises. In Colombia, for example, the World Bank recently approved a GCFF, or a Global Concessional Financing Facility grant, that supports the regularization and integration of refugees, which really presents an immense opportunity for Colombia to strengthen its socioeconomic inclusion and harness the potential economic benefits of a growing population. Because, in summary, Venezuelans need support to access legal employment, basic services, and education so that their lives are no longer on hold, which is often what we're seeing when they're there for 5 to 10 years. And then finally, I think another really good example is the graduation approach. And this has been implemented by UNHCR or the Hebrew Immigrants Aid Society, or HIAS in Ecuador since about 2015, and with PRM support also to trickle up. It's shown immense promise as a method to sustainably lift some of the most vulnerable populations out of poverty and foster a lot of the self-sufficiency that we're really hoping for. It's a step-by-step and time-limited process, and the graduation approach provides cash assistance to ensure families' basic needs are met and food is on the table, which forms that baseline, that basic provision of services that people need to get off their feet. And then it provides individualized livelihoods and financial literacy training in addition to that, and counseling services as well, so that people can kind of regrow their livelihoods opportunities and take it from there. So I think these are a couple of really good examples of kind of what we're seeing to push into this space a little bit more, some really innovative approaches to fostering economic inclusion for refugees and promoting livelihoods opportunities. I think our challenge as both a humanitarian and a development community will be to identify what these innovative programs such as these look like and how we can really bring them to scale. Because again, the scale of what we need to reach is pretty immense. And it really outstrips the humanitarian portfolio's ability to reach all of these needs. So I think that this particular dialogue is going to be really exciting, and we look forward to hearing your comments.
Thanks. Excellent. Thank you very much. Vikas, will you take us into Venture Lab a little bit and talk about your work there, please?
Sure. And thanks for inviting us to join the panel. So I come from I approach this problem from a different side. So I run an impact fund called Accion Venture Lab. And we are an investor in and a supporter of seed stage startups around the world that are using new technologies, new business models to expand access to improve the quality of, and improve the affordability of financial services for the underserved. And we exist because there is a big, big problem of which refugees and migrants are a subset, which is that 3 billion people around the world don't have access to an optimal set of financial services. 1.7 billion people don't have access to any kind of financial services. That means that there are many people around the world that are saving money not in a secure deposit account, but underneath their mattress. They don't have health insurance, so they are unable to afford a critical medical procedure. They don't have access to working capital finance, so they can't grow their business. Financial institutions have not served these customers. They have not served these small businesses because of a lot of reasons that ultimately come down to the fact that they're not profitable. They're too small, they're too hard to access, they're too hard to understand. And Sam has started a company that, and he's going to talk much more about how he's solving that problem. There's a silver lining, at least in our perspective, and that's that technology now exists to actually access, understand, identify, engage with, and serve the world's underserved. That's the internet, that's smartphones, that's mobile phones. In fact, technology penetration in many developing markets has far outstripped banking access. There's over 1.2 billion mobile phones in India. There's 800 million debit card-backed bank accounts. It's growing quickly, but 35, 40 million credit cards. So there's an opportunity to exploit that delta and ultimately finally serve groups that have been underserved. That's what we do. We think startups are leading the charge, really leading innovation. So we invest in them. We provide them capital. We provide them active support so that they can scale and include the poor in the financial system. Been doing it for 7 years. We have 40 companies that are operating in over 30 markets around the world, and they're all utilizing models. It could be savings, it could be credit, it could be insurance that really to populations that haven't been served before, broadly by innovating around data and distribution. And if you think about all of the challenges the financially excluded face broadly, those problems are really exacerbated for refugee and migrant populations. If you think about distribution, it's hard enough to go out and reach a rural farmer or somebody in an authorized slum in South Delhi. It's even harder when they've just moved or they don't have a house that you can go in and verify. It's really hard to give a loan to a small business that's been around for generations if they don't have an income tax statement or they're not in a credit bureau. Boy, it's even harder if that person has not had a chance to start a business. They've moved to a new place where they don't even have identification to prove who they are. So while we don't invest in companies specifically that solely serve refugees and migrants, we certainly have companies that do, and I think there's lessons among all of our companies for how to serve some of these kinds of populations. Do I have time to maybe give a couple examples? Sure. Yeah. Okay, so I'll give you just a couple examples of the kinds of stuff we've invested in. We have a company in Nairobi called Pula that provides insurance to smallholder farmers. They're providing kind of weather and crop insurance. They're really the first financial services provider many of these smallholder farmers have ever dealt with, let alone the first insurer. And they're able to do this really for a couple key reasons. They partner with seed manufacturers to actually make the insurance entirely contextualized and part of the seed buying process. So if you're a farmer, you go to the place you buy your seed anyway. There's a QR code now on that bag of seed that you use to buy. You scan the QR code, you're insured. They partner with the seed manufacturer to kind of make it a part of the process. Then, when it comes down to kind of doing claims, they use what is now very cheap small satellite data. They have their own innovative kind of a yield checking mechanism to allow people to very quickly get a claim and get a new bag of seed if they need it. So, data and distribution. They're using a new source of data that wasn't there before, small satellite data. They're using a big partnership with very large seed companies to distribute. We have a company in Dubai called Now Money that actually is serving the migrant population. They're serving kind of migrant laborers in Dubai. I'm sure many of you know about the plight of migrant workers in markets like Dubai. They're effectively indentured servants, and they really have no access to financial services, and it's because they're just too small. In fact, banks in the UAE have a rule about how big of an account they need to actually start, how big of a balance they need to actually start an account. So now money is coming in and providing all digital accounts to migrant workers. They're doing this by essentially working with the payroll systems that large employers are already using, and then they are actually providing remittance services, all digital remittance services to these migrant workers, so that they can send money home quickly via a digital account for much more fewer fees, lower fees, and not have to take the money out, go sit in a Western Union line for 2 days. Lose pay and not have the option to ultimately access other services. I'll give you one other quick example. I've been handed a 2-minute slip here, but I'll give you one other quick example. We have a company in Austin called Selflender. They provide what are called credit builder loans to individuals, many of whom are migrants from other countries that have not been able to build up their credit score. All of us, or many of us presumably, have credit scores here in the United States. It's a pretty screwed up process when you really start thinking about how people get and maintain credit scores. You have to have credit to build credit. It's this kind of it's this strange paradox. Selflender helps people do that. They do it by using what's called a credit builder loan. You borrow money, it goes directly into a fixed deposit account. You don't actually touch the principal. Over the course of 6 months to a year, you repay that loan, so that at the end of the 6 months to a year, you have savings, and you also have a credit facility on your credit report. So people that have no score, that have come to this country as refugees, as migrants, can build a score up to 650 in a matter of 6 months. This is actually a product that's been out there for decades. Credit cooperatives, community banks have been offering this. Sam, you might know more about this, but it's never really been done at scale. What Selflender did is, okay, come on the internet, come on our app in a minute. We can all do this right now. I'd love it if you did. In a minute or two, go on, start a Selflender account. You don't need really much identification, and you start building your credit. So all of these are examples of companies that are using new data, new distribution, new technology to provide services to groups that haven't had access to it. And hopefully we can get into a discussion about how that's relevant for refugees.
Yeah, great, excellent. I heard someone smarter than me say recently that the future of development is financial innovation. So I think we're talking about some of those now, and we'll get more into that with Sam's presentation. Please go ahead.
So I'm the ditch digger. I'm the one at the very end of the value chain who rolls his sleeves up, says, screw it, let's fix this. How? Quick context. In my early years as an entrepreneur, I was broke. We had a little bit of money coming in. I was engaged. We have a child. At that time, it was about 6. By the 20th of the month, we'd met the rent. We'd financed the car. And by the 20th of the month, St. John and I would be stood in Ralph's supermarket, and there'd be $30 in my wallet. And that was it. There was no reserve. There was nothing left on a credit card in case something went wrong. And that was debilitating levels of stress for me. Now, I was number 2 on the Order of Merit at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. I'm a Wharton graduate, and I have a Master of Science in Risk and Crisis and Disaster Management. I can get a 6-figure job in a big company by phoning one of my mates. There are 63 million people in this country alone who do not have that option. And so when the opportunity was presented to me to attack that problem, that is what we did. And I went out and I found some friends, and we attacked this. Now, one of the themes for me today is, of the 4 co-founders, 3 of us went to Wharton together, and the 4th spends about a third of her time going backwards and forwards to Uganda and South Sudan, and is part of the international development community. A key theme to me about solving wicked problems is about multidisciplinary. It's not about talking across disciplines. It certainly starts with respecting other disciplines, But if one is to really solve pernicious, wicked problems, one has to embrace other disciplines and work together with them. And the only way that we attack pernicious problems is by doing exactly that, is envisaging something. And we go to Vikas here, right? He's investing in people that before they created tech, created an idea about what they wanted to solve, and they made a plan about how to solve it. Generally, you'll find in those nascent startups a bunch of ideas from parallel places. The very best ideas come from a multidisciplinary approach. And so if you take one thing away, at least from me today, it would be find the other people in the room who come from another discipline. Quite often, we see in certain environments a regard of other disciplines as the other. You know, that difference between policy and people who work in the field, and, you know, God forbid, corporates or bankers or whatever. But there's always someone out there who wants to help solve the problem. And that is really what I do for a living, is I gather those people together and I set them in the right direction. You know, it's interesting to me, I talk about debilitating levels of stress. We know that with displaced people, particularly refugees, it is literally debilitating to their mental processes until they find their feet and they can become engaged. And so they are negatively judged as a result of that. So be it for people who grow up domestically, immigrants, refugees, the reason that we do what we do at Verdigris is simply to create a simple debit account, what the internationals will recognize as a current account. No overdraft fees, no credit, none of that, just simple transaction banking. Because the difference between having a debit account in the United States and many other places and not, prepaid cards, being paid by check, getting your benefits on prepaid or by check, is the difference between paying $1,100 a month and $1,100 a year and $400 a year. And I can tell you, $80 in my wallet at the 20th of the month would have been a lot better than 30, and that is the problem that we look to directly solve. Now, in order to solve the problem for those customers of ours who are doing international remittances, we then create networks of partner institutions from here to there so that we can accurately and transparently account to the government the money that moves. Why? Because that is what drives up the cost. And so a huge part to me of how we solve the fundamentals behind how you put a bank account in a refugee's hand is only solving how you put that account in their hand, but also how you enable them to do the basic transactions that they want to do. Now, for me, when we talk about the root causes, where do refugees start? Often in destabilized environments. One of my big passions is, all right, well, how do we get capital into an unstable environment quickly? And the flip side of that coin is, how do we stabilize those environments? And the reason that's important is, you know, again, certainly my practical experience, let alone research, shows the better that we can embed capital and start small businesses operating again in unstable environments, the quicker we can start to stabilize that environment. I am conscious of time. I've done that.
You're not getting this one.
I'm not getting that one?
No, you are getting it.
Oh, good.
Enjoy.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Yes, my 2-minute warning. So the one last point I'll make, and I think this is tangential to my point, but one that weighs on me quite often is, particularly for refugees, we often get refugees who have experience of running small businesses. They're entrepreneurial. They have professional qualifications, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, again, by being caught in effectively a de facto poverty trap of not having access to equal and affordable financial services, they are unable to leverage those capabilities. So for me, when we focus on solving a particular problem, we are able then to design solutions around that problem. And so I will finish as I start. To me, please embrace the other disciplines in the room. Embrace the other disciplines you meet today and start a conversation about the problem you want to solve.
Thank you. And I think that provides a really nice segue just for a little bit of discussion here before we turn to you, which is, how do we break down these barriers, or how have you broken down these barriers? I mean, Anna, you really talked about policy and the relief work that you're doing at state. I have a career in government as well, and I know that those walls can be high and thick sometimes. But what words of wisdom do you have in this space, to this point of, reaching across walls, breaking down walls? If you could address this question, I think it would be interesting to just start off our conversation with that.
Sure. Maybe I'll start, and I do think that breaking down barriers in large bureaucracies is one of our greatest challenges. And I think that it is something that at least the USG has really been working on, both internally across both State Department and USAID, our colleagues also who work on development, but also externally. And so we've really been trying to increasingly engage with the World Bank, for example, because the World Bank brings to the table, as I've mentioned, a lot of interesting expertise on the development side, and they're interested in engaging in situations of fragility, conflict, and violence. And so I think looking for new partnerships like these, I think, is the next direction that we're trying to go. Everything in the federal government, I think, is always a little bit slower, but it's definitely a place that we've recognized we need to work on. I think, in particular, we really need to identify what our relative comparative advantages are, I think, between the humanitarian space, the development space, and the private sector space. Identifying what those comparative advantages are so that we can better identify what the gaps and needs are during a crisis, and then plan how our resources are going to align with that. And that's one thing I think that we internally as the USG is trying to work better on, if a little bit slowly.
Vikas, have you had any experience sort of working private sector, public sector successfully? What do you think is the future there?
Yeah, I mean, again, I kind of come from a perspective of the startup and the innovator, and we are deeply aware that these startups are not going to work, and therefore we're not really going to be able to push the boundaries of financial inclusion, which requires much more than just these startups, if we're not able to get them in front of and really partnering with larger institutions, government. Every one of our companies relies on other entities. No startup is an island. They require, they need to partner with banks for financing and often infrastructure. They need to partner with large telecom, MNCs to reach customers. They need regulators to set up the infrastructure and the policy that actually allows them to thrive. So, I mean, that's critical for our companies. We try to do that in a lot of different ways, or help our companies rather do that in a lot of different ways. Part of that is raising their profile and just getting them in front of more parties. A part of that is being kind of thoughtful about how these startups need to interact with regulators. Many of our companies are working in markets where policymakers have not yet even decided if they should be regulating these kinds of companies, let alone how to regulate them. These are entirely new kinds of businesses with totally new kinds of products. So we try to be a part of that process. In many markets that have come out with fintech laws or have been kind of evolving them over time, Mexico and India come to mind in particular over the last 3 or 4 years. We've tried to be a part of informing what they're doing. I think to varying levels of success. I think India in particular has been incredibly innovative in how they've set up kind of a set of digital infrastructure to allow seamless financial services. Yeah. We're in many ways we're a drop in the bucket in what needs to be a really massive effort with a lot of different parties.
Thanks. That's good. Sam, just real quickly on this, and then if you all want to line up, we'll take your questions following Sam's response.
Very briefly, I think this is a mindset issue. We are used to talking about stakeholder mapping and our environments. I want to make that a little more granular, and I will admit to the arrogance of when I left the Army, our way of problem solving was the best one, and experience has taught me that's certainly not the case, but it's still the fundamental of the way I approach things. The fourth co-founder, Kate Nicol, the development side of our founding team, drove this ethic very early on of we need to think of every counterparty as a customer. And so we look to solve problems. We look to solve the problem of our counterparty rather than just think about what it is that they're trying to think of. And I think, that kind of shift in how we approached the world around us We're very respectful of everyone around us because we have to be. We are at the mercy of everyone from investors to regulators to clearly customers. But in taking that approach, I think approach drives it as much as culture does, and certainly as much as just thinking about the world around us. Was that time efficient enough?
Extremely efficient. Are there questions from the audience? I have a question for the group if there aren't. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Tamara Webb from Arizona State University. Thank you. This question is kind of piggybacking off of the comments that Anna made earlier about cash transfers that would go directly to refugees. And this is a classic question about welfare maintenance, how you manage that. What types of tools and assessments are you using or have you seen that helps to identify who's ready for that infusion of cash and when they're done with that infusion of cash and are now needing to be self-sustained with their own cash flows so as to not create a financial dependence, a stigma on that type of a process, and to not exhaust the funds that may not already be available to provide that influx of money?
I think that's an excellent question, and I think that's something that the humanitarian community is battling with right now as cash transfers kind of gain momentum. Because, as I mentioned, there is a lot of recognition that cash transfers have all of these benefits as well, but you want to be able to manage them. And I think as the US government, we generally take the approach that we're modality neutral. And so we enter every single context with the assumption that we need to understand what that context is and what the best modality is. Cash isn't always the answer. There are places where there aren't markets available. They're fewer and far between, I think, now, but cash isn't always the best way to approach that. And so often, every single time that we're going to be using cash, we do a market analysis to make sure that there are markets available, that it's actually safe for women, for example, to go to the markets and purchase things. So there's a lot of different moving pieces that we're trying to track at any one point when we're actually providing cash. And I do think that there's also a growing recognition that cash is most effective when you're pairing it with other humanitarian assistance pieces. And so we're calling this cash plus. Because cash in itself, a lot of refugees, they're not going to know what to do with the cash once they actually receive it. But if you can provide a little bit of guidance, or if you can tell them exactly, there's a hospital down the road that we would recommend, they provide assistance in this way, that we would recommend you go to that hospital. There's a lot better outcomes. And so we're kind of at the cutting edge of monitoring and evaluating exactly kind of the best use of cash in different scenarios. But there's a lot of interesting work that's being done. And I think the graduation approach is one of the best ways that they're doing that. So the graduation approach does provide a time-limited cash transfer, so over the course of 18 to 24 months. And then once that cash transfer is complete, the idea is that refugees should have been able to acquire some sort of livelihoods training over that time so that they're able to actually start a business after that 18 to 24 months. And then you're evaluated as you kind of progress over those 18 to 24 months and you're ready to kind of move on from there. So there's a lot of interesting thinking on that. So it's a good question.
I don't see any other questions from the field, but I have a question.
There's a question right here.
Excuse me. Could you, I know it's being taped, could you please?
My name is Alex Carol Cabanes. I go to Wesleyan University. Forgive me if the answer to this question is obvious, but to me it's not. A large theme of the convention today seems to be how to make the private sector, how to make sort of international development profitable, or at least incentivize the private sector to become involved. How do you take a population that is so marginalized, that is so hard to integrate into, forgive me. How do you incentivize the private sector to invest into a population that is so marginalized that generally they will not be able to get a profit out of? Thanks.
Thanks. I'll take a crack at that at first, quickly. Thanks for that question. And that's a challenge for the Refugee Investment Network. I mean, some people think the name of our organization is an oxymoron. And that gets back to my initial preamble, which is that we have to show that this is an incredible, in many cases, resourceful, entrepreneurial population. It blows the mind to think that 44% of Fortune 500 companies in America, and this is true, are started by first or second generation Americans. that really surprises people. There's a certain grit and stick-to-itiveness and innovation that comes with this population. That's the story we want to tell. It's not everyone, but it is a good chunk of people. We work with a company down south in Atlanta called Amplio Ventures, who place refugees, legal immigrants into the United States who have been refugees. Business is booming because when one of these persons is given a job, there's no churn. There's no turnover. The loyalty, et cetera, that stems from that is really quite incredible. This is a story we need to tell, not just in this country, but in many countries. And we talk about refugee investments, obviously, being the Refugee Investment Network. But this isn't sort of pie in the sky. These things are occurring already. There's dozens, if you read our report, hundreds of refugee investments that we can point to. Not directly in refugees per se, refugee owned or refugee managed perhaps, but we have a broad definition. We have a lens approach, which really gives capital some comfort coming into, impact capital some comfort coming into this market. So definitional work, lens investing is really helpful for the investors. Is someone else in there?
Can I grab so, refugee camp in South Sudan, right? There are active functioning businesses because there is a microcosm of Washington, D.C.'s commercial district going on there, right? There are people buying and selling, and someone's cutting hair, and someone's charging batteries, and life continues. And so the economics of the freakonomics and economics of life continue. In that kind of environment, there's always, frankly, a profit incentive. There's always a way to use for profit to invest in and expect to create something of value. There is an implication in the question, whether intended or not, that for profit means we have to make big financial returns in order to participate in something. That's not true. We as a business, it's a very little amount on everything that we do that we slowly create value, but we create value. And I think you'll find there are a lot of other for-profits that think the same way. I'm a fundamentalist. It has to be for profit. You can't just keep investing and think one day, magic will happen and suddenly this $8 billion company will be profitable. However, the work continues. And so I often have arguments with developmental colleagues about, give me a for-profit motive. Let me find the for-profit motive, and I reckon I've got a better than even chance of solving a problem. And so the real trick is for developmental to work with for-profit to find where that incentive and motive is, and that is how we solve those problems. And frankly, if we deliver this in the way we hope to, Verdigris will be living testament to that.
Yeah, I would only add that, I totally agree. We need to approach the refugee population as one that is able and one that can also include customers, but profit can look different ways, and oftentimes, despite what you hear about free markets and how profitable certain companies are in certain parts of the world, boy, there's a lot of different players involved with making companies profitable. There's all kinds of layers of support and partnership that make even for-profit companies profitable, and that should be the case for the kinds of companies that are serving refugee populations. I didn't get a chance earlier to talk about a company that I don't know as well. We haven't invested in it, but we've supported it through an alternative fund we started called Leaf, that is serving this exact population. They are very, very early, but their concept is to essentially allow people that are moving, refugees that are moving from a home country to a new country, to put their money in the blockchain. And then move to the new country and be able to access it. And they've partnered with mobile network operators to set up mobile wallets, allow the mobile wallet to send money into the blockchain via Leaf, and then pull money out, and they use their own digital ID system and the like. They don't make money by taking away from those balances. They don't charge transaction fees. They make money from essentially the returns that capital generates over the period that it is being held by this entity. So that's just an example of how there's ways to extract value that can still build a profitable, but maybe not Apple business that that can still allow that company to be sustainable and offer a valuable product to refugees.
Well, I'm afraid we're out of time, but I like that you ended on Leaf. Leaf is one of our partners as well and a tremendous company, but there's dozens of companies out there, innovators, using technology, very much intentionally going after these populations. That's what we talk about, is intentionality. And as long as the intention is there, we feel that that's progress. The intention to create jobs, the intention to invest, and to change the situation that many of these folks find themselves in. Thank you all for attending our panel, and I think some of us will stay up here if you have more questions, but thank you very much.